Headless Priest. Part 1. The Legacy of Darkness. The Church of San Gregorio, built in the heart of Boyacá during the colonial era, stood as an imposing witness to centuries of history. Yet inside, among faded murals and dust-covered pews, lay a dark secret. In the 18th century, the site had witnessed an event so horrifying that even the townsfolk preferred not to speak of it. A curse weighed heavily upon the place since a priest, accused of heresy and dark practices, had been beheaded after a secret trial. His story was buried with him, but his shadow lingered, as did the unexplained disappearances and growing superstitions among the villagers. In 2023, a team of archaeologists, led by Dr. Julián Mora, was sent to investigate the ruins of San Gregorio. The team had a clear objective: to document the church's findings and recover any valuable historical artifacts before restoration plans began. Julián, a passionate historian and lover of colonial mysteries, had no idea that this mission would mark the beginning of something that would change his life forever. While clearing debris near the main altar, a crack in the floor revealed a hidden crypt. Inside, they found a wooden chest, sealed with a symbol that Julián immediately recognized: an inverted cross surrounded by Latin inscriptions worn down by time. Carefully, he opened the chest and discovered a journal wrapped in cloth, blackened by the centuries. As he read the first pages, Julián realized that the journal not only recounted the life of a priest, but also contained chilling details about forbidden rituals, dark pacts, and a curse that seemed far from mere myth. At that moment, a cold shiver filled the air, and the team's lights flickered, as though something invisible had awakened deep within the church. That night, Julián dreamed of a man dressed in a black cassock, walking headless under the pale light of the moon. Upon waking, he felt as though something was watching him from the shadows of his room. It was only the beginning. The archaeologists worked under the faint light of dawn, the cold mountain air of Boyacá seeping into their lungs. Despite its dilapidated state, the Church of San Gregorio exuded an aura that Julián described as overwhelming. The moss-covered, cracked walls seemed to harbor a latent resentment toward the intruders. Julián leafed through the journal in a corner of the camp, fascinated by the writings of the priest who had penned it. The author described a town devoted to faith, his efforts to build a community grounded in devotion, and later, something Julián had not expected: ritual sacrifices. "What does it say?" asked Lena, a young and enthusiastic archaeology student. "This man, he wasn't just a regular priest." Julián looked up with a grave expression. He wrote about blood rituals and something he called the Pact of Immortality. Lena eyed him with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Though the team was used to local legends, what Julián described sounded like something out of a horror novel. "It could just be fiction." Lena shrugged. "Priests were human too, right? Maybe he was just crazy." "Maybe. But there's something about his writing," Julián insisted. "It doesn't sound like rambling. I get the feeling he believed every word." As evening fell, the team decided to explore beyond the main altar. Driven by reckless curiosity, they opened a passage that led to an underground chamber. The air grew dense, tinged with a metallic odor that Julián couldn't identify. At the far end of the chamber, a headless stone figure caught his attention, its hands extended toward the sky. "This is disturbing," Lena muttered, her voice echoing off the walls. "It looks like an altar," Julián said, carefully touching the figure. This place was used for more than just prayers. It didn't take long for the team to unearth a second, larger chest. When they opened it, they found human bones, some broken as if subjected to brutal force. Lena quickly stepped back, feeling nauseated, while Julián seemed entranced. Back at camp, Julián continued reading the journal. One page in particular left him breathless. Those who descend to the altar without repentance shall awaken the guardian of the damned. My soul no longer belongs to me, but my penance shall be eternal. That night, the village dogs began barking for no apparent reason. One of the archaeologists, Andrés, went out of his tent to investigate and never returned. By morning, they found him near the underground altar, his face contorted in terror and a strange mark on his neck that no one could explain. Something had awakened in San Gregorio, and Julián's team was about to confront it. Dawn in San Gregorio brought no relief. Andrés's body lay on an improvised stretcher, covered with a white sheet, while the team waited for the local authorities to arrive. Deep down, everyone knew there was no natural explanation for what had happened. Julián, seated near the underground altar, held the journal in his hands, reviewing the last pages he had read. "This doesn't make sense," he murmured, running his fingers over the worn text. "It says that the guardian of the damned awakens only when someone desecrates the place, but we just opened a chest." Lena, standing next to him, gazed toward the dark passage leading to the underground chamber. There was something in that darkness that seemed to move, a shadow that shouldn't be there. "What if we didn't just open it?" she whispered, as if afraid something else might hear her. "What if we woke it up?" Before Julián could respond, a blood-curdling scream shattered the camp's silence. They ran toward the church's entrance, where one of the archaeologists, Sergio, lay on the ground, trembling. His face was pale, and his wide eyes stared unblinkingly toward the church's nave. "I saw it," he shouted, pointing with a trembling finger. "It was there. It has no head." The team tried to calm him down, but his words filled everyone's hearts with fear. Sergio described a tall figure, dressed in a black cassock, gliding through the church's shadows. He claimed to have heard a whisper, as if someone was praying in Latin, before feeling a cold so intense it paralyzed him. "That wasn't a hallucination," Julián said, feeling a knot in his stomach. "Something is here with us." That night, the team decided to take turns keeping watch to prevent further incidents. Lena and Julián took the first shift, sitting near the church's entrance with flashlights and radios in hand. The starlight barely illuminated the camp, and the oppressive silence was broken only by the occasional crackle of branches in the wind. "Do you think we should leave?" Lena asked, breaking the silence. "I don't know," Julián replied, his voice heavy with uncertainty. "If we leave, we'll abandon this place without answers. But if we stay, I'm not sure we can handle what's coming." Suddenly, a metallic sound echoed from inside the church. It was as if someone was dragging a chain across the stone floor. Julián and Lena exchanged glances before cautiously getting to their feet. "Stay here," Julián ordered, but Lena followed him anyway. They both walked slowly into the temple, though aiming their flashlights at the dark corners. The statues of saints and angels, covered in dust and mold, seemed to watch them with empty eyes. The sound of chains grew louder, accompanied by the echo of footsteps. "Hello?" Julián called, his voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone there?" There was no response. Suddenly, the flashlights flickered, and a chilling cold filled the air. Lena grabbed Julián's arm, her breathing quickened. "We're not alone," she whispered. Then they saw it. Emerging from the shadows, a tall figure dressed in a black cassock appeared from the back of the church. Its movements were unnatural, as if it were floating rather than walking. But what terrified them most was the absence of its head. In its hands, it held a rosary, the beads glowing with a faint red light. Julián instinctively stepped back, but his foot caught on a stone, causing him to fall. The figure stopped and raised the rosary, as if blessing the space. A low murmur, almost incomprehensible, filled the air, and Lena covered her ears to block it out. "Run!" Julián shouted, pushing Lena toward the exit. They both ran out of the church, their hearts pounding in their chests. Outside, the rest of the team looked at them in alarm. "What happened?" one of them asked. Out of breath, Julián turned toward the church entrance. The figure was no longer there, but the echo of its presence lingered in his mind. "It's awake," he said finally, "and it's not leaving." The team decided not to enter the church again, but fear and tension began to divide them. Sergio, still traumatized, insisted on leaving immediately, while Julián tried to convince them to stay and unravel the mystery. However, something in San Gregorio held them back, as though an invisible force ensured that none of them could escape, and the headless figure had only given its first warning. The camp was engulfed in tense silence. No one had slept. The shadows of the night seemed to shift, and every creak of the wind through the branches triggered a collective startle. Julián shut himself inside his tent, holding the journal in his hands. He knew the answers lay within the yellowed pages that time had tried to erase. What he couldn't understand was whether he should keep reading or leave that cursed place. Outside, Lena was arguing with Sergio and other members of the team. "This isn't normal," Sergio said in a low voice, though the desperation was evident. "That man, or whatever it is not from this world. We need to leave before something worse happens." "What if it follows us?" Lena asked, crossing her arms. "What if it's not the place, but we who are cursed now?" Sergio looked at her incredulously, but before he could respond, a voice interrupted them. "The journal explains it." Julián stepped out of his tent, his face haggard and the book in hand. The priest knew what he was doing. This wasn't an accident. It was a pact. The journal reveals its secrets. That same night, Julián gathered the team around an improvised campfire. Although the cold enveloped them, what they felt was more than just the effect of the weather. There was something in the air, something watching them from the shadows. The priest who wrote this was named Father Miguel Valdivia. Julián began, leafing through the journal. He was assigned to San Gregorio in 1765. According to his early entries, he was a devout man, obsessed with eradicating sin from his parish. But something changed. Julián ran his fingers over a page stained with dark spots. Here, it says he started having visions. He writes about a hooded figure offering him the power of immortality in exchange for his devotion. He thought it was a test of his faith. He thought it was God? Lena asked incredulously. Julián nodded, but it wasn't. In his own words, he describes how, after accepting the pact, things began to twist. His parishioners disappeared. The masses were interrupted by strange noises, and the church filled with the smell of sulfur. He started performing sacrifices to maintain balance, convinced he was doing the right thing. Lana and the rest of the team exchanged nervous glances. The story wasn't just then terrifying. It seemed to echo what they were experiencing. "What else does it say?" Sergio asked, almost in a whisper. "The pact wasn't with God," Julián continued, his voice lowering with each word. "It was with something far worse. He mentions the guardian of the damned, an entity that guards souls that can neither ascend nor descend. When Father Miguel tried to break the pact, he was condemned to wander for eternity." A sepulchral silence fell over the group. The fire seemed to dim, and the cold grew more intense. The first warning. In the middle of their gathering, a sudden sound made them jump. It was a dry thud, as if something heavy had fallen. Everyone immediately got up, shining their flashlights in all directions. "What was that?" Sergio asked, trembling. The beam of one flashlight pointed toward the entrance of the church. There, in the dim light, something moved. A tall shadow, almost motionless, but undeniably present. Julián took a step forward, trying to get a better focus, but a gust of wind extinguished the campfire, plunging them into total darkness. "Run to the tents," Lena shouted. The team scattered, but Julián didn't move. Something inside him felt he had to confront it. His flashlight, flickering, briefly illuminated the figure, the headless priest, hands extended, holding a blackened crucifix. "What do you want from us?" Julián shouted, his voice firm, though his heart pounded uncontrollably. There was no response. The figure simply pointed toward the church, as if inviting them inside. Then it disappeared, leaving behind a dull echo that resonated in the air. Echoes of the journal. That night, Julián returned to the journal, desperately searching for answers. He found an entry that left him breathless. "The Guardian will not stop until the pact is fulfilled. If the living refuse to complete it, their lives will be taken as tribute." The words imprinted themselves in his mind. He now understood that his team was trapped, not by curiosity, but because they had unleashed something beyond their control. The priest was not just a specter. He was a guardian demanding sacrifices, and time was running out for them. That dawn, while the team tried to sleep, Julián made a decision. If the priest wanted them to return to the church, they would, but not without a plan. He was convinced that if they could learn more about the pact, they might find a way to stop it. However, in the shadows of San Gregorio, something was lurking, waiting for their next move. So far, we've reached the end of Part 1 of the Legacy of Darkness. We've witnessed the unsettling discovery of a cursed journal, the appearance of the feared Guardian, and the first terrifying encounters that test Julián and his team. But this is just the beginning. Part 2 will take us even deeper into the mystery surrounding the Church of San Gregorio. The shadows grow darker, the answers become more disturbing, and the choices more critical. Will they find a way to break the pact before it's too late? If you want to find out what happens next, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the upcoming chapters. And don't forget to comment. What would you do if you were in Julián's place? The story continues, and the Guardian won't stop until his purpose is fulfilled. See you in the second part of this story. Part 2, available on February 1st.